Imagine a continent filled with thousands of native nations, languages, and trade roads older than any European map. Then imagine invisible passengers arriving with the ships and moving faster than any army. Smallpox was the most feared, but it was not alone. Measles, influenza, typhus, and other illnesses followed. And the key point is this: these diseases did not need conquest first, they spread through contact. When Europeans crossed the Atlantic after 1492, they brought microbes from a crowded world of cities and livestock. Many Europeans had some immunity from past exposure. Many native communities did not, so the same illness could hit harder and wider. Disease traveled along ports first, then along rivers, then along trade routes. A visitor, a trader, a captive, a single meeting could start a chain, and once the chain began, it could jump community to community, even beyond direct European presence. In the Caribbean, epidemics struck early, and the shock was massive. In Mesoamerica, a smallpox outbreak around 1520 became a turning point because it hit during conflict, weakening cities, disrupting leadership, and making resistance harder at the worst possible moment. Farther north, along the Atlantic coast, sickness arrived in waves. Sometimes before large settlements appeared, communities would hear rumors of great dying, then see it in their own homes, and the fear was not only death, it was the speed and the mystery. Smallpox spreads through close contact, and in crowded winter housing, one case could become many. Measles and influenza could sweep quickly too, and because travel and trade continued, outbreaks rarely stayed contained. They moved like fire through dry grass. The outcomes were not only numbers, they were social earthquakes. When elders died, languages, histories, and ceremonies could be damaged. When leaders died, alliances broke, and decision-making stalled. And when healers died, knowledge of plants and care was lost. Think about what that does to defense. A community weakened by illness cannot hunt the same, cannot plant the same, cannot move the same, and cannot gather warriors the same. So even when people fought bravely, disease could erase strength before battle ever began. Then the second blow arrived: famine, because sickness disrupts food systems. Fewer hands to harvest, fewer hunters to travel, fewer caretakers to store supplies. And when hunger follows disease, recovery becomes painfully slow, sometimes impossible, for years. As populations dropped, power maps changed. Some nations absorbed survivors from others. Some formed new confederacies. Some relocated, and some communities fragmented. This was not disappearing. It was forced transformation, under pressure, across huge distances. European colonization expanded in this damaged landscape, not only by force, but by opportunity. Abandoned fields became targets, weakened towns were easier to seize, and negotiations became uneven because a treaty signed after an epidemic is not made on equal ground. In New England, a major epidemic in the early 1600s weakened coastal communities before large English settlement took hold. Later, new outbreaks returned again and again, and every wave changed who could resist, who could trade, and who could survive the next winter. Disease also became a weapon of fear, sometimes intentionally, often simply through careless contact. And there is debate about specific cases, like the 1763 Fort Pitt episode often cited with smallpox blankets. But the broader truth remains. Even without intent, germs gave invaders an advantage. On the plains and in the West, smallpox outbreaks in the 1700s and 1800s hit trading hubs and river routes because trade connected nations across long distances. So the same network that moved horses, metal tools, and goods could also move infection silently. By the 1800s, steamships, forts, and expanding settlement increased contact. Epidemics could follow migration trails, And when children were gathered into missions or boarding systems, sickness could spread in crowded conditions, turning institutions into outbreak centers. The results shaped politics. Weakened nations faced growing pressure to cede land, to relocate, to accept outside authority, and to survive inside smaller boundaries. Disease did not cause colonization alone, but it multiplied its force by breaking communities again and again. And still, native nations endured. People cared for each other, adapted, rebuilt, and carried memory forward. Some communities developed quarantine practices. Some shifted travel and trade during outbreaks. And later, vaccination campaigns were adopted in many places, though often unevenly delivered. So when we ask what smallpox did, we must say it clearly. It killed. But it also shattered trust, disrupted economies, changed borders, and accelerated conquest. It turned the simplest human act, a visit, a handshake, a shared meal, into a risk with historic consequences. And the final outcome, the one that echoes, is that the history of the Americas cannot be told without this invisible war, because illness helped decide who held land, who held power, and who survived to tell their story. Yet native nations are still here, still speaking, still resisting, still remembering.